Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Hard Times Strongmen podcast, where we are creating a better class of man. This week, bringing a different perspective in the prepared and outdoor community, someone from the UK that we thought we could bring on and share his vast experience, knowledge, and just a different perspective on this whole outdoor and prepared mindset, especially from coming from a culture where it's not really normalized and just purchasing a firearm is not the answer for a lot of these people. So joining us today is Mr. Richard Prideaux. Welcome, Richard. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thank you for having me. Do you want me to introduce who I am?
Yeah.
Because none of your listeners will know who I am.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and actually, that's what I was going to say first. If we can just kind of get a very, as brief or detailed background as you want on who you are and what you're doing.
Okay, so my name's Richard Prideaux. I live in Wales, which is the bit on the left-hand edge of England. So it's the bit that's not Scotland. It's a separate country, but we are part of the United Kingdom. And I have done everything in my life possible to avoid having a real job. And so far, so good. So in the current state, I have a business that trains people in outdoor safety. You could call it survival, I suppose, but the emphasis we put on it is making sure that you don't get into that survival situation in the first place. So it's teaching people good skills and drills on how to do their job in the outdoors, because that's who a lot of our clients are. But also just individuals and sort of groups using it for leisure, how to develop a good skill set so you don't end up in the survival situation in the first place. And in parallel to that, I do some other weird and wonderful things. I teach people about wild food, a lot of stuff around foraging. I consult for businesses that use wild plants in their very expensive products. And occasionally I pretend to be a photographer as well.
You have a vast amount of experience coming into this outdoor game.
It's not something I didn't sit down and go, right, I'm going to have a career in the outdoors. I just kind of bounced from thing to thing that looked fun. But from my early 20s, and I started working in the mountains here in the UK as kind of a mountain guide, because a wilderness area here in the UK, or as close as we have, are the mountainous areas of North Wales, the Lake District, Scotland, places like that. That's where you go to if you want to walk for a day without seeing a road. And to take people out into those mountains, there are qualifications. There's a whole qualifications scheme for that. So I started going through those qualifications, and then you can do this work and you can do this work, and picked up all sorts of like day gigs, and then working for a week at a time for different places. And then I started doing some work overseas, leading trips overseas, mostly with the British clients, but doing things in Africa and doing stuff like Everest Base Camp and things like that. And then from there, I was just really, really lucky to be standing in the right place at the right time to get onto other interesting work, to the point now where I've worked with the military, I've worked with film and TV people, consultancy there, stopped pop stars from dying during music videos they were filming in the mountains. Random stuff. I was in a search and rescue team here for 9 years, and I train search and rescue teams now. So yeah, at some point my British sense is going to kick in, and I'm going to have to stop talking about the stuff I've done because I feel really uncomfortable. You know that.
No,
we can't. Yeah,
I like how you said you just wanted to kind of do things that, you thought were interesting, and it's not like you made a plan on, okay, I'm going to be into this outdoor industry. I've kind of bounced around, because that's very opposite than what the normal North American culture is in this community. People are like, I need to start, I don't know. Military seems to be the baseline for a lot of people. They're like, oh, I'm a soldier, and now I'm a subject matter expert in outdoor stuff, when that's not the reality for a lot of those guys. So I like how you have a lot of experience, and you've just built it over a long career so far.
I think that's the thing, that when you ask any person, like, where are you now? How do you get to where you are now? A lot of people will be able to unroll that and say, well, I did this, and before that I did this, and that put me in a position to do this. They might give you the honest answer. They might give you the wave tops rather than the wave troughs of that story. But if you flipped it the other way around, if you went to that person at 21 years old and say, right, at 39, you've got to be at this point. How do you structure your life to get there? It's impossible to repeat that path. It's, every single day you had a dozen decision points that led you down a slightly different route to get to where you are now. And I don't know, in the last 5 years, particularly as I've started to become more well known in a tiny, tiny sphere, I've had more people asking me, hey, how do I get your job? How do I get to be able to do what you're doing now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think I disappoint people by saying, I have no idea, because I'm not entirely sure how I got here where I am now, but being in the position to like take those opportunities as they come along, being able to say yes to things when it's appropriate, to say yes to everything, but also then moving to a point where you are secure enough to say yes to some things, but no to the wrong things as well.
Yeah.
You know, those like transitional things.
It seems like there's an element of luck to that too. Just being right place, right time.
What's that thing about the more you practice, the more you prepared, the more lucky you are? That you luck is a big part of that, but you also have to be able to recognize the opportunity when it comes along. And I can think back to the times where I didn't recognize those opportunities and I missed out on something, but I see those as part of that learning process. You know, that thing of, I don't have anything valuable to sell as an instructor that I learned by just doing it right the first time. Everything valuable that I sell is a mistake that I've learned from. And that not seeing an opportunity and sort of then saying, oh yeah, I was unlucky because I missed that. It was like, well, you could have seen it. You could have positioned yourself maybe to be in that right place. That's part of the, okay, yeah, well, I screwed that up, but yeah, I'm going to learn from that. So make sure that I try not to repeat that mistake again. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Whenever I was looking up your company, Original Outdoors, because that's, again, what you're doing now, I guess mainly, right, is like I want to say like 70% of the time, or no, is it little like 50-50 with all your other ventures?
It's about 60-70% of the time at the moment. So
okay.
Working in the outdoors in one way or the other, yeah.
Yeah, and then what are you mainly doing with that specifically? Is it mostly clients that you're bringing out, or more like consulting?
It used to be open courses. So
okay.
Before COVID, it was public courses week after week, 52 weeks of the year. We were doing something somewhere, people working for us, taking clients out as well as private training and consultancy. And then the lockdowns here in the UK, and particularly in Wales for COVID, really brought that to a screeching halt. So I'm not going to do the COVID thing, but we got to a point where you couldn't leave the county. You couldn't leave the county.
It was like that here in Canada too. You couldn't leave your region. Yeah.
Yeah, police
roadblocks.
Checkpoints.
Yeah, and they were arresting people. Yeah, it was a thing here. Yeah.
Which really puts the dampers on a business that involves taking people around the country and bringing you to one place. So when that opened up again and that sort of all calmed down, we were looking at that and going, do we want to go back to that? And we decided actually maybe there's a different way to do it. So we started doing more content creation. So we've got, I think, the podcast that you found us through, which is Modern Outdoor Survival.
Yeah.
But we've got a few others that are in the pipeline or will probably be out by the time this comes out. That reaches a wider audience. And we found that we can do in-person training for some people when it's appropriate, we've got a group of people who want to do that thing and do that thing as a very bespoke training, or it's part of a wider training program that we only offer to the military, say, or to the police, search and rescue teams. But now I don't do much general training with the public. The only thing I do is open public courses right now, or we offer right now, I think, are the foraging and wild food courses, which is a weird parallel because we meet very, very different clients there. We don't meet anyone who's really interested in survival preparedness, really, or at least they're a very small minority of it. Kind of the foraging courses tend to be very middle class, very soft, very gentle, interesting things, but it's a subject I love talking about, and it's a subject I love working with people on. So that's the only one we really do as a public course now. But everything else now is pretty much consultancy training for clients who are professional end users.
Yeah, which is just super cool to see how much it's evolved. And obviously, COVID wasn't like, I'm going to say like the benefit of a lot of businesses, but for people to survive that, like, restriction, they had to change their, their business plan, their model, their, whatever their end result was to adapt to the new end user. So
Yeah, we thought we had a diverse business model because we did consultancy, we did in-person training, we did these other things, and then it's like, yeah, they're all knackered by the fact that you can't travel to somewhere or people can't travel to you.
Yeah.
I didn't see that as a single point of failure until it failed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, going back to that thing about learning from your mistakes. When we plan ahead with a business now, it has to be, okay, there has to be some income resilience that's not there that doesn't rely on that single point of failure. It doesn't rely on that one aspect. I mean, can we still make money? Can we still run a business just by staying on the farm and creating content here, doing some work here in some way? And yeah, that's actually flipped my thinking a little bit about preparedness and resilience and those kind of things as well. About you can have a really grand plan for survival, for safety, for not Tiautwoki, we're not getting into that, but that kind of severe weather event, flood, fire, civil unrest, those local things. You can have a really intricate plan. You've got all the gear, you've got your thing, you've got this thing in the corner, you've got that thing in the corner. There'll be something you haven't seen, that you haven't thought of, which that pin goes and everything falls apart. So what I try and teach people now and put a different emphasis on is being flexible, is having a whole toolkit of skills, having a whole toolkit of possibilities, but being ready to deal with that unpredictable thing. Because if your whole plan relies on being able to foresee every single thing and have a thing ready to deal with it, something's going to come along from the side and hit you in the side of the head that you just weren't thinking of. Those businesses that have survived and that are still there now, I think the outdoor space here is still really struggling with that, because we seem to go through like 10-year cycles with the businesses, and we went through this in the last recession, sort of the 2009 2008 thing, where a lot of businesses that existed before, they folded, and a lot of new people came into the space, new guides, new touring outfits, new trekking people, who whatever the sport was, and then they've had their 10-year cycle, and now something else, this is the next one that's come along. And already this year I'm seeing a lot more providers, a lot more people coming along to move into that space and say, hey, yeah, we're doing the thing, we're doing the really interesting thing. And you look at those people coming in and go, okay, so we start the clock now. In about 10 years, you're going to be where I was when you started. And it'll be really interesting to see how many of those same problems they're going to go through. Or are they going to have a whole other set of problems that is very specific to them?
How much of the new companies that are coming in, are they bringing in new ideas, or is it just the same stuff as the previous 10 years?
I would say social media is making a big difference now. It was a thing that without a website, you were dead in 2010. If you didn't have a website, if you were one of these places where you had to write a letter and they would send you their course timetable, those places still existed in 2010, but they didn't last long. Now it's social media dominance. It's not about your qualifications necessarily. It's not about your professional reputation. It's just that how many followers there, how many likes on that reel, how many likes on that TikTok account. So much so that people are bypassing any kind of qualification scheme because they've realised it's not necessarily a legal requirement, it's only an insurance requirement. So they're bypassing going through the qualifications and becoming guides, becoming instructors just through their social media.
With how far social media has become, you can look like a rock star on Instagram or YouTube, but have never done that job to a professional standard, let alone taken any professional courses. And now you're running a shooting company, for an example. But like you said, 10 years ago, it wasn't a thing. People just wouldn't have even looked at you if they didn't know your resume. So it's just interesting how it's blended into even anything outdoors as well, like guided.
It is, and it's some, because I don't do anything tactical personally, but a lot of those outdoor skills that I built up and that we sell to people now, we sell into the tactical space.
Yeah, they're totally applicable to the military, law enforcement.
Yeah, land navigation is land navigation, whether you're shooting somebody at the end of that bearing or not.
Yeah.
And for law enforcement, tracking and search techniques are very, very similar to SAR tracking and search techniques. So we sell the same thing. Within that, so I overlap into that world, at least in terms of what I see from clients, what I see from friends, and something that you see every now and again is the really cool photo of a chess rig with this thing and this thing and this thing, and then you look at it and go, yeah, but all that stuff's brand new, and the only way you got that thing into that pouch was doing origami by folding it in and in and in, which means you can't deploy it and put it back in the pouch again without going through the same process. So presumably in the middle of a firefight or whatever you're doing, it's like, hold on guys, I'm just going to fold this thing. Yeah, it won't fit in unless I fold it 17 times this way and wrap it around. You've got the elastic band that was on it. Yeah, I'll put that on then. So it's stuff that works in photos but doesn't work in real life. And you see that a lot in the outdoors. There's a whole thing with the bushcraft thing, which is people buy a load of gear, go into the woods for a day, build a shelter, destroying an ecosystem that took 30 years to develop, take a whole set of photos, and that's 2 months worth of content for them.
Yeah.
And then they just keep putting a photo on. Yeah, we're sponsored by this knife company, these boots, this place, this place, this place. All that stuff's shiny. All that stuff's brand new. Meanwhile, there's a guy somewhere who doesn't know social media exists, who's sharpening his knife on a river stone somewhere and using a head torch that he bought in 1994 that he just keeps putting new batteries in. He knows a universe more of content than the person with the photos. But in this new world, the person with the shiny photos is the one that gets the kudos and gets the respect in a way. And it's a strange thing, the way we've changed the way we take in information and what we see as, maybe not what we see, the three of us, but what we see, we as a society see as valuable, see as worthwhile.
Yeah, I had this discussion with someone a couple of weeks ago, and we came to the conclusion that people want to appear like they're doing the thing, but they don't want to actually do the thing. So it's easy to like that photo that looks like sexy or like looks staged, but to actually go out with that guy, like you said, who has the, his head torch is 30 years old, and he's just he knows way more information. People don't want to do that with that guy because they're going to be uncomfortable, and it's easier to follow the mainstream social media platform than actually reach out to a guy and learn a skill.
I know, and in a world where worth is calculated by followers and likes, I can only assume that the best instructors in anything in the world all wear yoga pants.
Just like Six said, it's kind of weird to hear from the UK perspective that it even affected the outdoor industry as heavily, because we see it in North America for all the tactical gear stuff where every 5-10 years the phase changes, different people. But it's weird because whenever North Americans, I know for me, whenever we think of the UK or Europe, I think of outdoor stuff in the sense of these guided trips. I think of these crazy adventures or going to all these different countries, and I'm it's crazy to hear how one world event, whether you believe it's fake or not, COVID, put everything at a screeching halt, and now anyone who was doing this at a professional level, you've had to adapt your business model and figure out, okay, what can I do long term now to keep this going?
Yeah, I mean, not to make any emotional comparisons, but just in terms of the before and after, it's a little bit like 9/11.
Yeah.
And the sort of tactical military space.
Yeah.
Before 9/11, unless you were involved in very few conflicts, if you're in the American Armed Forces, Canadians, British, most of NATO, you had a few smaller things, Kosovo, maybe the Gulf War, maybe some stuff in the 80s, but that was very, very limited. Whereas now, if you have been in the armed forces for longer than 10 years, you have seen, and you're in infantry or something like that, you have seen combat. You've seen combat in a sandy place.
Yeah.
Almost by default. So there is a seismic shift happened within that world. The COVID thing, I think we're still working that out now, but everything from working at home and remote working and video calls like this one to how you do in-person businesses, how you do in-person experiences. We've worked out now for the future, most of our audience is on the other side of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
For what we're selling.
Yeah.
And we've got business partners in the States now that we work with, and we sell training via them. And what we've had to become aware of here has changed in those 3 years, but actually, when I look around and look at the outdoor space, particularly in things like hunting and stuff like that, you can see how much America particularly, but Canada to some degree, has affected, maybe infected, that outdoor world. So we get more American brands here, more American recognition, particularly in sort of the hunting firearms space. I've got the same rifles for hunting that my friend in Indiana has, and we talk about the same thing. We both got Vortex scopes. We both got these things, but it's not just that. There's a whole cultural thing that's affected it here. So much so that I've got friends who you can't bow hunt in the UK. It's illegal to hunt with a bow.
Oh, I didn't know
Crossbow.
that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a weird law. It was when the laws changed in the 70s because crossbows started becoming cheap and popular, and they just outlawed all bow hunting.
What?
In one fell swoop.
That is so weird.
I know.
Yeah.
But you can't bow hunt in the UK. Despite that, there are UK outdoor influencers who are sort of soft sponsored by Hoyt.
Yeah.
And they put posts saying hashtag bow hunting, hashtag this, hashtag that, because they are actually influencing the American market.
Even though they're from the UK. Yeah.
Yeah, because on the internet everything's
like blended. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And we got this we've heard of the Uniparty. This is the Unination. It's this English language sphere that is now our global market.
In the military world, it was really cool in North America if you were rocking anything British. Like, you know what I mean? Like guys wanted a Bergen, guys wanted handwags, guys wanted anything UK. But then, as like you said, that shift happened. Now, like I've talked to UK soldiers, and they're all rocking North American because they think it's cool, right? Yeah. There's like that blend, yeah. And it's crazy that it's happened with the outdoor industry as well.
Oh yeah, everyone wants Cry multicam and American gear and Team Wendy helmets, and even the terminology has shifted.
Yeah,
with it. So because of so much co-working between the US and the UK military, a lot of special forces terminology is now the American terminology.
Yeah, because it just becomes the NATO standard, and then even in the outdoor industry too. Like again, I know the Bergen as an example, right? Is like it's actually like the British term. But there's like a bag that is a Bergen, right? But even in Canada, people were calling rucks in the army like your Bergen. It was just the term we adopted. Yeah.
But there are weird things I think that don't quite get over there. Like we have a lot of Scandinavian influence into the UK outdoors,
which I'm jealous of because those guys are very they're at a high level of professionalism from the Scandinavian countries.
And it's very, very different gear. So it's like if I was to recommend a bushcraft knife to somebody, I would be looking at something like a Castrum or something like that. Mm-hmm. If you're going for factory, not going to a maker, but you want to get an off-the-shelf, go and buy it from a store now, I would say go get the Larsfalt Castrum knife, which is virtually unheard of in the States. But it is the perfect shape, it's the perfect size, it's perfect hand size for a lot of people. It serves everything, but it's almost unheard of in the States. So it's weird how there are some things that affect us that haven't made it across to your side and to the outdoor culture there. I feel like the American, particularly, that your culture is set entirely on transmit.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There's not much in the way of receive.
Yes.
So you're just broadcasting this stuff out across the world. But because you make some really cool stuff, you have some really cool ideas, you have a lot of influence, and a lot of the culture now comes from between the eastern and the western seaboard. Mm-hmm. We take in a lot of that, but we do take in a lot of the stuff from the Scandinavian countries and like in farming gear, because there's a whole world of like farming clothing now.
Yeah.
Because everyone has a social media brand. The New Zealanders, the Kiwis, because their climate is very, very similar to the UK. So if we live in a rural area, we live on a small farm. All of my friends are farmers. If I go and see any of them, they've got some level of New Zealand brand on them. Oh. They wouldn't be wearing an American brand, maybe Carhartt, but that's about it. It's weird how you get these sort of tribal things around nationality and gear and nationality and influence on things. The Eastern European stuff and the sort of the Baltic countries seem to be taking more and more. I don't think the Ukraine war has had an influence on that, but made more Americans seem to be getting aware of like brands like Helicon Tex.
Yep.
And what's the crazy Finnish guys who do like army surplus, but not Varastolaika.
Yes, yeah, I'm familiar with them. Yeah, because they're one of the only European like surplus or distributors that will actually ship to Canada. So I've looked at them before. Yeah.
There's a thing with this that like it is a skill to be able to look at a piece of equipment on the shelf or whatever, or even online and go, yeah, that's actually worth the money. This thing will do the job that I need it to do. It's not the most expensive. It's a brand I've never heard of. It's any brand Chinesium from Amazon, but it's a pump for inflating a mattress. It doesn't need to be able to smelt uranium. It just needs to do the thing.
Yes.
And be disposable. That is a skill in its own, and that's something I try and get across to clients. It's not just about the brand you've heard of. I mean, it's like, because when somebody turns up with Arc'teryx and all the other names that you've heard of, all the logos on the chest, on the pack, and wherever, all that shows is that they too can use the internet and have a credit card.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
it's straight. It's straight consumerism over actually skills.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know for me, a lot of the questions that I usually get are, what piece of gear should I buy? I never get asked, hey, what skill should I learn or focus on? And I think that's like a culture thing. We need to like reverse that. That should be the question people are asking is, okay, like I want to get into outdoor anything. What skills should I learn? Versus every question I get is, hey, I want to get in outdoor stuff. What ruck brand? I'm like, dude, it doesn't matter. That's not like the first question you should be asking me. Can you make a fire? Can you make a shelter? Can you procure water? What's your food plan when you're out there? These are the bigger questions than what ruck brand. And then again, we're constantly harping on, skills over gear, but I think it's the media is a big issue. Yeah. The fact that anyone can look up anything, just like you said, Richard, and you can see a cool photo from a guy that has 10,000 shares, but the guy just staged a photo in his backyard, not even in the mountain. So,
and there's a weird subset of skills that becomes the expectation that if you're doing anything remotely related to survival, the moment that word creeps in there, people go, right, when are we going to light the fire and roast a rabbit over the fire? It's like, yeah, there's a farmhouse 5 miles away that way. Learn to navigate and walk 5 miles. You'll be fine. If you can spend 8 hours here trying to make a bow drill using that special sharpened necklace thing that you've got and your shoelaces, or walk 5 miles, you'll be there in a couple of hours if you're going slowly. Go there, use their phone. You'll have a bath, waiting for the ambulance to arrive. There's what's going to kill you first is the thing I bring up on courses, and that's the thing you should solve. What's going to kill me first? Okay, what's going to kill me after that? Okay, solve that. What's going to kill me after that? Solve that. And that's kind of your order of importance. This whole thing about you need fire, you need shelter, you need water. It's like, not always, not everywhere. Some places, if in a flood, water's less of an issue.
Yeah.
Safe drinking water maybe, but just generally water on its own. Shelter can mean all sorts of different things. It has to be very environment specific. And this thing of trying to find a global principle of survival, well, it really is what's going to kill you first. Solve that. And that's not always an equipment solve. That's often a skill solve, or just a not being in that situation in the first place solve, which is always very easy to say, but it's like, okay, so your plane crashed in here and you don't know where you are, and you've only got this and this with you. It's like, okay, well, how did I end up in this situation? Why was I with this crappy airline? Why was I not vaguely aware of the routes this airline was taking over? I'm flying from this place to this place in South America. Okay, well, have we passed the mountains yet? Have we passed that big river yet? These things, you could have filled in a bit more of that gap on the knowledge before you got anywhere near the aircraft. But it's just that mindset and thinking back, which is, as we said, less sexy than taking a photo.
I like earlier too how when we were talking about like what you're currently doing and with or whenever you guys were more consulting or running training, and that's why I know whenever we first started talking, I said I like how you defined survival is like you shouldn't get to that point because you're almost like you have messed up in your planning phase or something has gone terribly wrong. And I like how you said we're focusing on like safety and how to prevent you from ever getting to that point. And I know from my experience, and I'm not sure what you guys were told six in like the US military, but anytime we did any quote unquote survival stuff, they said survival is just you're suffering. You're not like something has drastically failed. But the term fieldcraft, which I use like synonymously with my like nomadic fieldcraft name, it's just fieldcraft is just living. That's you operating day to day in a whatever environment you're in. Like you said, it's environment based. It could be different for different people. But if you're actually doing that survival thing, something has failed, and you could probably plan to not get in that situation.
Yeah, like the definition of those terms is it is something I've tried to think about. Well, I've had to think about more in the last few years because I'm communicating to a wider audience, and any part of that communication is about having clear, concise ideas. And if you're 15 minutes into a podcast and you're still saying, well, kind of, well, maybe that people have turned off. So my clear breakdown of these things is survival beyond just the general, you're breathing in, breathing out, and you're not dying survival that all of us listening, anyone listening and all of us are doing right now. Anything beyond that is about an emergency situation. It's gone from, there's a thing in some military and some of the stuff we teach, which is NOPs and EAPs, normal operation plans, emergency action plans. Normal operation plan, day to day, this is what you're doing, everything's going fine. Oh crap, bad thing happened. Now you go to emergency action plan. The survival training related to that, a lot of that happens in the normal operations plan to stop the emergency from occurring in the first place, or at least, is this a predictable event? Okay, let's have a kit for it. Let's have a plan for it. Let's try and get as far down this road of planning for it as possible. So that's survival. When people say, "Oh, I'm going out to the woods for a survival weekend," it's like, well, you're going camping.
Yeah.
You're going camping uncomfortably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It might be uncomfortable. You might just be lying on a bed of leaves in your underwear, but it's still camping.
But you're not surviving. You're living.
It's like you don't say, "I'm going out for a car crash weekend." Well, maybe some people do, but
Depends on how much I've had to drink.
yeah, I'm going to drive.
That's awesome.
Yeah, headlong into this wall at 60 miles an hour, and then when the airbags go off, and then I'm going to practice my survival skills. No one does that. So there's nothing.
Awesome.
There's nothing wrong with going camping. There's nothing the best, most prepared people I know who have good stuff in their house to live from for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, indefinitely. They're often good hikers, campers, backpackers. If you've lived out of a rucksack for an extended period of time, you're sorted. You have almost all the skills you need for a long-term disruption of services, whatever. So the camping side of things then, okay, well, that can, and the general outdoor skills, that's a huge world on its own. And there's you can spend a lifetime learning and still not get anywhere near what one person knows if they're really focusing on that subject. And if you include all sorts of travel, mountain biking, canoeing, pack rafting, all these other things that people do now, there's a huge world out there of stuff to learn. And I kind of do that. I kind of drift between, I was really into mountain biking and I got my mountain bike instructor qualifications, and then I hit a tree doing 30 miles an hour and broke my back, which kind of put me off the idea for a while.
Yeah.
And going off to do other things. But you can spend a lifetime learning about any one of those skills. So the outdoors world, if you include that as part of camping,
it's huge.
then that's huge. That's an endless thing. And then there's bushcraft, which is weird. And it's taken me a while because you see it used for lots of different things. For some people, it means, okay, you have to have a shelter made of moss and sticks. You need to have a beard. You need to be wearing at least 50% leather and canvas. And you need to be doing something that looks like an end of the world situation somehow, but you've got a shiny axe. That's what it is for some people. But when you look at the origins of the term and where it came from, it's sort of this parallel thing that grew up in different English-speaking countries. So there's a set of skills which are called bushcraft in Australia and New Zealand, because their backcountry is the bush.
Yes.
And you've got Richard Graves, who wrote the 10 bushcraft books, which was essentially a survival manual for the Australian Armed Forces. How to survive in Queensland, how to survive in the remote area to the north of the country where you might be fighting the Japanese one day, maybe. How to defend your own country. And then you've got Moores and Moores Kahansky, and the godfather of Canadian bushcraft, who had the other book, Bushcraft, which is the one which has the illustrations that look disturbingly similar to the illustrations in The Joy of Sex. If you ever put the two next to each other, they are basically the same illustration.
The same book.
It's the same guy with the same beard. Somebody pointed this out to me. I don't know if it's appropriate for your audience, but you scar the people for life with that one. But his stuff was very focused on the northern hemisphere, particularly Canada. So there's a lot of stuff in there about, embrace the birch tree. It will give you everything you need. those kind of skills. And he developed stuff, and the Moors super shelter, this idea of, okay, we've got this plastic sheet, and that acts basically as a greenhouse in the sun during the day, and then you roll this foil blanket over it to keep the heat in at night, and these really weird and interesting techniques. But none of that would have worked in Australia. But there's two different.
Yeah, they're two different climates. So again, this term it's used too broadly, and even whenever I tried to look it up. Because I was getting a lot of people asking, well, what's the difference between bushcraft and fieldcraft? And like, we never used the term bushcraft in the Canadian military. It was like fieldcraft. So I tried to research it, and everything that I found was it was just making things out of natural materials. And that could have been I'm whittling a spoon because I lost my spoon or something, you know what I mean? Or like you said, you're making the shelter out of natural materials or whatever. It's again a very broad term.
Yeah. So in that thing of trying to chase down a nice definition of it, because we're about to start a new podcast, show about bushcraft.
Oh, nice.
But the what I've tried to bring it down to, and I'm still working on my definition, but it's work or living in the outdoors for a purpose that involves an interdependency on that landscape. So either
that makes sense.
Your ability to read the landscape. So there's this term that myself and then another guy called Tristan Gooley, we both claim we invented it, but I think we were both drinking at the same time. So I'm sure someone else came up with it. But it's landscape literacy, being able to read a landscape. You can look at a set of hills, and if you understand the geology of that area, you can go, oh yeah, we're more likely to find caves and underground networks at that end. That's where you'll find a water source because there's more green vegetation there, whatever the thing is. But you can read a landscape. Somebody with a tactical mindset might look at that and go, yeah, these are routes to travel, this is that. A sniper looks at a landscape and immediately starts building a range card in his head.
Yeah.
You are literate in one or two different things for the landscape. So bushcraft for me involves being able to read a landscape for that purpose. So why I think it encompasses fieldcraft, because for the military you're looking at it for one thing. If you're from a SAR team, you're looking at it for something else. You might be looking at splitting it into search areas. Okay, where are we going to have the hard left-hand edge of the search area? Mark that with flagging tape. Okay, we're going to go to the end of this trail. We're going to block that off as a barrier to travel, whatever it might be. For the hunter, it's something else. For the camper, it's something else. But it involves having an interdependency with that landscape, because it's quite possible to move through a forest, move through a mountainous area, and live entirely out of your rucksack. And fundamentally, there's no difference between you being camped on that little bluff overlooking the forest or a Walmart car park.
Hey everybody, this is 6 and 7 with the Hard Time Strongman podcast, and we are coming to talk to you about our Patreon and Discord.
Hey guys, our patrons get early access to all of our episodes. They get all of our exclusive pre and post shows, all of our spicy takes, all of our rabbit holes that we go on, everything that we want to include in an episode, but we can't because we need to stay on topic. And soon enough, we will be offering digital downloads, guides, everything that we've been working on in the background will soon be available to our patrons. So make sure to check it out.
And come hang out with us on Discord. Speaking of the spicy stuff, this is where we discuss most of it. Once you're there, you'll get access to all of our in-depth discussions, including stuff like homesteading, fieldcraft, medical, camping, communications, shooting. You like ARs? Come talk to us about it. You like 4x4 vehicles and prepping? Come talk to us about it.
You like tannerite, thermite, napalm? Come talk to us about it. All of the campfire talks that would get us kicked off of other platforms, it's right there in our Discord. Come join our community.
We're active on Discord every day. We're interacting with members constantly. We have guys from every walks of life coming to contribute their expertise to all of these various fields and subjects that we've been talking about.
Come join the Discord. Come join the Discord. Join our community. Build up that better class of man. Now back to the episode.
Yeah.
The stuff in your rucksack is the same.
Yeah.
You're on a sleeping pad, you're on a tent.
Yeah.
You've got your head torch, you've got your water, you've got your stove. The landscape is just the pretty thing you're looking at. Whereas if you're putting a tarp up, but you're using these branches to block off that end of the tarp to create a windbreak. You're putting a fire here, but you're orienting your tarp because the wind's blowing in this direction to take the smoke in that way, so it's not blowing straight into your tarp. Or that weird thing where you put your tarp of wind of it and it creates an area of dead air that sucks the smoke under your tarp. That's bushcraft. That's that knowledge, that understanding of the landscape, that if I do this, the landscape will do this to me. If I do this, the landscape will do this to me. And if I do this to the landscape, in 10 years, it will look like this. If you cut all the trees down, you're not going to have a forest to hang your hammock in. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm trying to get round to in sort of some of the newer stuff we're teaching is, okay, can we bring it back round to maybe what the people who these terms originated with, what they were doing, and make it applicable to a much wider audience. And as you can probably tell, I've got a lot of interest in that subject at the moment. It's that bit in between survival and camping and outdoor experience.
And trying to blend the two, essentially.
It is, but I think it has to involve doing a job. You have to have a purpose for being there. If your whole thing is going out just to build the shelter, and you're enjoying building the shelter and taking the photo of the shelter and then leaving again, that's like going to Disneyland and being really excited about the hotel room.
That's true. That's super accurate whenever you break it down like that as an analogy. Yeah. You're right, because you're not looking at like the landscape. You're not looking at the bigger picture. Yeah.
Or even if I'm taking a tarp and a sleeping bag and this mat because I'm also hunting and I've got a backpack out with 45, 50 kilos of meat. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to take a 2 kilo tent and this and this and this. I want to have a super light kit set up, which means I have to pick a good site for my bivvy. Mm-hmm. I have to do things in this way, light a fire because I can't take a stove because I'm going super lightweight. That would be bushcraft, even though you're using some modern kit. It's because you're there for a purpose. And I think finding purpose in what you're doing in the outdoors as well will change your mindset. Even if that purpose is, I'm going to go here and not look at a screen.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people just don't know their purpose. They don't know why they're going out. They don't know what they're preparing for. They don't know what they need to focus on, essentially. Yeah. No, that's super interesting, and I really like your definition of what bushcraft is, because I've tried to research it a lot as well, and it's very broad of a subject. There's so many origins in theory. There's so many people who claim it was their own.
Mm-hmm. That does sound like it's the very definition of just balancing the primitive and the modern skills that we have
in your landscape again, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, like based on your environment. Yeah,
because if you go for the bow drill firelighting method, if your thing is you want to learn that as a skill, and it's a good skill to learn the fundamentals of it, learn what you need to do every time, what won't work. But then I see people backpacking into the forest carrying a bow drill set on the side of their Osprey rucksack.
I've never seen that. That's awesome.
Why would you want to punish yourself?
That's awesome, because they want to practice that skill.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh god. Yeah.
And I've done a few things with journalists, and
that's
did one
crazy.
With the BBC.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, well, not that long ago, I did a thing with a BBC journalist, and I think I disappointed him slightly by. We're talking about firelighting and things, and I think he wanted me to say, "Oh yeah, and this is when you use the bow drill," because the thing was, "What if you lose your lighter?" I'll go, "Well, I'll go and get my other lighter." Yeah, what if you lose that lighter?
I'll go and get the other one.
Yeah, they cost like 50p. They're not expensive. You can have them everywhere. They last forever. I've got this ferro rod. I've got this other one. I've got this tiny one. I'm a pen knife. You can have these things all over your kit. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, what if you lost all of those? It's like, well, I'm going to reconsider my life choices because obviously something's going wrong.
Going home.
Yes. Yeah. Like something has happened. Like just like what you said, when the reality of what the survival is, it's the emergency. It's something poorly has happened, and I don't know when it became this big sexy thing where survival training, right? Survival training, air quoting, is what everyone wants to do, but they don't even know the basic fundamentals of, like you said, camping, even being outside and where to select your campsite. A lot of people don't know how to do that.
Yeah. I think the military is to blame for everything. As a complete civilian, I can say that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But
honestly,
it's like aircrew survival stuff. You are ejecting out of your 21st century fighter jet and suddenly dumped into the Stone Age, apart from whatever was strapped to your thigh and underneath the seat when you ejected.
Yeah.
That's a situation where you couldn't have done much more to prepare for the event. You had the kits, you ejected safely. Martin Baker Company made sure you got out of the aircraft alive and parachuted down into the forest. But
and you somehow didn't die jumping from your parachute either.
Yeah, and
like...
you're 2 inches shorter now from the ejection. But that then became, okay, we'll go and talk to a survival expert. This guy's been teaching SEER for 20 years over here. It's like, yeah, but he's been teaching survival skills to a very unique set of people for a very unique set of circumstances who are... It's something that's quite likely, that's quite possible that's going to happen to them, but it's not how the majority of survival situations take place.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's the 80% solution for like 100% of the people. But like you said, it's just glorified and, oh, I need to do this because if I lose everything from my rucksack, I can make a bow drill now. Is this because, again, like just referring to you being from the United Kingdom and like we were saying pre-COVID, everyone like outdoor activities, like less survival, less tactical, it is very common there. But are you seeing the blend now where people do want these more primitive survival skills or even modern survival skills, or they just want survival as like a skill set now?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a guy who is partially to blame for all this going back sort of 25 years, and that's a guy called Ray Mears.
I know who that is. Yeah, I don't know him personally, but I know who you're talking about.
So Ray Mears, civilian, but he had still has a long career teaching people from all walks of life, and he was the one who really popularised the term bushcraft in the UK. He had primetime BBC TV shows called Bushcraft and Ray Mears' World of Survival and things like that. So in the late 90s and early 2000s, he was doing so. He had a whole 1 hour episode where he made a birch bark canoe by the side of a river in Canada. And that was, and just like, it was slow TV, but it was just making it piece by piece and then paddling and talking a little bit about the history of the birch canoe and things like that. But stuff that would never be on TV nowadays. There's a whole generation of people who grew up with that. And I was watching, because I'm 39 now, so that was formative for me, but I think it really started with a guy called Les Hiddins, the bush tucker man in Australia, who was kind of the Australian equivalent. He had primetime shows in Australia going through Queensland and places like that, saying, oh yeah, you can eat this and it tastes like this and you can do this, and telling interesting stories. So there used to be TV was the culture for it, and that was the cultural touch point for it. And then books, and there were magazines like Combat and Survival and things like that, but they were very much focused on large knives and stories about the sort of places that used to advertise adventure careers in the classified at the back, which is basically going off to be a contractor. That's all it was. Okay. Or private security. Yeah, but it was like, you can go and be an adventure career working for this oil company somewhere. So that was kind of all that was there, alongside the hiking, mountaineering, mountain biking world, which was more legitimate. There were 2 or 3 magazines that were all devoted to mountain hiking, and then there was a couple more devoted to rock climbing. And mountaineering has a long history in the UK, and sort of in the wider empire, and then the Commonwealth. A lot of the world famous mountaineers came from those British influenced countries. Yeah. So that was where a lot of the outdoors stuff lay. And then in the early 2000s, the bushcraft thing kicked in a little bit more, and along with the internet, because it then became possible to share more information about these things. It used to be there were 3 or 4 places in the UK, these bushcraft schools, survival schools, where you could go and you would learn these esoteric things like how to use a bow drill, like how to make a shelter entirely from natural materials. And then the internet kicked in and we could start learning from Americans and Canadians. And I remember my first hammock was a Hennessy hammock. Oh, yeah. And I was on a Canadian outdoors forum in the early 2000s, learning how to use it and like how to modify it so you put the zip on the side, otherwise, because the getting in from underneath is stupid. And then I used that overseas on those work trips, leading groups overseas. It was hammock was part of the kit list, and I just took my Hennessy hammock. So you started getting all the cultural influences into it. And then in the 2010s, when social media really kicked in, that's when everything changed. And now you have the biggest. You went through a period in the 2000s where the biggest influences in the outdoor world were people who had been instructors at these bushcraft schools. You know, and then they set up their own schools and saying, this person was course director at so-and-so bushcraft school or whatever. Or they came from the military and they built that, and they worked at the SEER school in the UK. They did this or they did this. And I think you guys have got the same sort of thing over there. But they were using that cachet as a build-up to it. In the 2010s, the people who were turning into their 20s in 2010 onwards, they were born in the 1990s.
Yeah.
So they didn't know who Ray Mears was.
Yeah.
Maybe you see it on a rerun on TV or you see a YouTube channel now. But their influences were the internet and other social and forums and then social media and other things. So what happened with that was it shifted over to wilderness culture. And that's what people wanted to do. So in the 2000s, people were interested in mountaineering, going into the mountains in the UK, the coast. In the 2010s onwards, it was all about finding wilderness in the UK. You wanted to go into a forest and cut down trees and build a shelter and fish and hunt with a rifle and do all these things, which for the vast majority of people in the UK is very, very difficult because we don't have much landmass.
Yeah.
We have a dense population. Population is about slightly less than a third of the US population in a landmass that's about, I think we're about the same size as Arizona.
Yeah, you guys have a lot. You guys have a lot of people with not a lot of what do you guys call it there? Is it crown land like Canada? Like that's what you call public land, Richard? What do you guys call it? Like just free land? What would that be there?
We don't have a direct parallel. So every inch is owned by something.
So there's always someone who owns something. There's nothing that's actually free.
Some of it's owned by the state, but actually the laws that allow access are universal.
Okay.
Across whether it's a private landowner, whether it's a corporation, whether it's a state-owned body. So there's two types of access. You have public rights of way. So these are trails. It's under the Highways Act. It's the same thing that makes I can drive down the road over there. There are footpaths. So there are trails that you can zigzag back and forth across the country. There are thousands of miles of footpaths that go through farmers' fields, through people's gardens, through forests, along riverbanks. And if you have one of these public rights of way that cuts diagonally through your garden, you can't block it. You can't stop anyone from using it. You've got to have a gate either end. Yeah, so in a weird way, we have more access rights in some cases than others. There's not anywhere in England or Wales that you can't really find somewhere to walk off tarmac within a mile radius of any one point. There's one of these trails. And then you have the Countryside Right of Way Act in England and Wales, which is, it takes that right of foot access and expands it to an area. So there's sort of a polygon drawn on a map. Anywhere within that area, you can walk off trail. You will not be trespassing, but you can't do anything other really than walk and take a photo and sit and have a picnic. Okay. You can't mountain bike on that land under that access. You can't camp on that land. You can't hunt on that land. You can't light a fire on that land, which knocks out about 2/3 of outdoor activities for people on social media now. Yeah. It doesn't mean those things don't go on. It just means that it's kind of under the radar. And where we are in North Wales, it's a fairly low density population. I mean, I can walk outside of my back door now and I'll see lights on the hills, but I think I'm probably 2 miles from the nearest street light. It's
okay.
And I'm in a relatively busy area. If I go to my friend's house, it's a 25-minute drive down a non-tarmac road. And if you walk outside of his house and there's no power on, you'll think you're dead. It's just black everywhere. There's no lighting at all. So we do have remote places to go to. And when I was in a search and rescue team here, we occasionally came across, how shall I word this? interesting evidence of fairly high-level organised crime involving narcotics and the handover of money for them in very remote places. And if people want to find a middle of the nowhere place,
you can still find it. You just have to look for it.
Yeah, and for the hunting thing, it's all about, access to firearms is possible for either hunting or target purposes. And if you want firearms for hunting, then you need to have, apart from shotguns, you can own without any other good reason, as long as you're not the equivalent of a felon. If there are rules about storage and where you can use them and that kind of thing, but for rifles, for firearms, as they're classed, separate to shotguns, you need to have a good reason for owning them. Hunting is a good reason, but you need to have permission to hunt on certain acreages of land. So I can hunt. There's about 2,000 acres of land I have access to hunt on in the local area.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, and it's a lot by UK standards. I've got a lot of friends who are farmers, and I make sure they're my friends. But that, not being able to go through all those things, because I live in a fairly remote place, easy access to the mountains, easy access to the coast, easy access to forests. I do lots of interesting work in the outdoors. I'm fortunate enough to have places to hunt, to be able to use firearms safely and responsibly, and all of that. That's not the story for most people.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you're not like most average UK outdoorsmen, regardless of what they think they're doing. They are not Richard Prideaux. They don't have access to this. They don't have the means. So it's very regulated for you guys, for everything. And I'm grateful for that fortune. But like we were saying earlier, you put yourself in the position of favour sometimes. That I've steered my life, if anything, to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. That's because those things are important to me. But if you're 21, you're growing up in the centre of London, you haven't got that access. Yeah.
So you haven't got anywhere to go and do these things. And even if you wanted, you could drive to a national park, but there's no equivalent of Crown land or public lands.
Yeah, that's what
where you can go and build a shelter and light fires and do those kind of things. You can't even camp in the mountains legally, technically. There was one place in England and Wales where it was sort of legally permitted, and there's actually that has just been overturned, or really it's that they've redefined the law. So there's nowhere in England and Wales that you can just turn up in the middle of the night and legally camp without the permission of the landowner. Scotland is different. So in Scotland, that is equivalent of our public lands. They have
because it's not regulated by like the government there.
There was something called the Land Reform Act, I think 2004, and that almost did away with the idea of trespass. So as long as you're not in somebody's garden or on a railway or impinging on somebody's privacy, you can camp, you can light a fire, you can build a shelter, you do all of these things. So, and it is legally enshrined. The only thing you can't do is hunt, really. Those laws didn't change. But you could walk for 3 weeks across Scotland, lighting fires every night, building shelters, sleeping on mountaintops, drinking from streams, and nobody could do anything about it legally. So we do have those places, but there aren't many forests up there. A lot of it's open mountain land. Our mountains aren't big. They go to the biggest the highest in Wales, and that's higher than anywhere in England, is 1,085 metres above sea level, which isn't high.
It's not that high for a mountain, But for the UK, it's high. Yeah.
And sea level's like 20 miles away.
Yeah. So in perspective, it is. Yeah, in perspective, it is pretty high for the location. Yeah.
Yeah. To use imperial, a 3,000 foot, 4,000 foot ascent mountain day is quite regular. That's something that's normally done. In Scotland, they're a little bit higher. I think it's 1,344 or something is the highest, which is Ben Nevis, but it's still not that high. But because they're all coastal mountains, we're on the western edge of Europe. I mean, when you look at our latitude as well, we're level with Newfoundland, the bottom edge of Alaska. We are high.
You are high.
We get a lot of wet, windy weather. So the outdoor skills that it's quite possible to have a career as I have, or even just, as lots of friends have who don't work in this world, but they do this stuff all the time. becoming a very, very skilled outdoorsman for the situation and the climate we have here. So to answer your question, which seems like a long time ago in my rant here, that influence on the outdoors here, there used to be a different outdoor culture in the UK because it was built around what we have, which has taken 10,000 years of civilization here to build. And that, the reason we don't have any trees on our mountains is because we cut them all down and then we put sheep on there and grazing animals, and there aren't any trees anymore. So that's why our mountains are virtually treeless, and a lot of Scotland is treeless for those reasons. But that's happened over thousands of years. People seem to now want to be able to get that North Woods experience here in the UK, and they seem almost angry, disappointed, aggressive that it's not there, that they can't replicate it, because I've seen this guy on YouTube doing this and I can't do it in Surrey, in one of the counties outside London. It's like, well, there's a lot of other things you can do, but that's wasn't our outdoor culture. But weirdly, it is now. And we've hit this strange point where we have a lot of influences from the other side of the Atlantic, or even from Scandinavia and places like that, but people can't replicate that here, so they get disillusioned, or they really focus in on the one bit of thing they can do. So they find a bit of scrappy woodland somewhere, half an acre of woodland, and they go there and camp every weekend and make a YouTube video about it and make a YouTube. And you'll see this a lot here with UK outdoor channels. Everything's 2-night camping in the storm, in the woods, in a thing. It's like, dude, that used to be called just camping. That was my childhood.
Yeah.
I mean, if people are getting those hundreds of thousands of views and making the money from it, then great, more power to you. But it's, as I get older, I try and think about things more in cultural terms, and like, what's the legacy? What are we leaving on for the next people? What will I teach my children? What would they learn? What will they then learn and carry on with? I don't know where the outdoor culture in the UK is going now, because it seems to be either entirely focused on social media reward or pretending we're somewhere else.
Yeah. It's just interesting how, even though your environment is not what people want it to be, you're still fostering a culture that is very much proficient in the outdoors. Because from the military side, I know 6 and 7, I've talked about numerous militaries numerous times, but every British soldier that I've ever met, like Marine, like commando, whatever, they like rocked being outside. These guys were extremely proficient at being outdoors, for coming from a country where, like you said, there's not a lot of bush. The mountains aren't as high as, like, the Rockies in Canada or the United States. Yet these guys still had a very basic, or a very proficient understanding of a very basic skill, which is just living and breathing and operating outside.
Being wet and cold for 2 weeks consistently, when nothing will dry, and there's always wind coming at you from one angle or another, and you can never seem to get out of it, that will develop a skill set.
Yes.
And
or you'll die.
Or you'll die, yeah.
Yeah.
And the military training areas here, because a lot of these are on the open mountainside or open moorland and grassy mountains, and they're not pleasant places. I've worked on them as a contractor, as an external trainer, quite a few times. They're not comfortable places to be, and they are bleak. You can stand in the middle of somewhere and just go, right, there's no infrastructure here apart from some roads and some buildings made in the 1950s over there that have no glass or a roof left on them, and I could walk 15 miles in that direction on a straight bearing, and I am going to cross at least 20 streams, 4 bogs, and it will still look the same when I get there. I think that has an effect. And we also have the opportunity, our military has the opportunity to train in neighbouring countries. So going across to Scandinavia and Norway.
Yeah, Norway is a big one for you guys. Yeah.
Yeah. But Scotland, the Scottish mountains, they are one of my favourite places on earth. And there are a lot of incidents there every year with deaths, hikers, climbers. People just go missing. People go missing and just never seen again, because they are that open mountainside, no forests. There's a road in the bottom of most valleys, but it's just a road. There's 2 strips of tarmac and that's it. There's cars going through it at some times, but a lot of people have died within sight of those roads. And I think there's something about that being constantly cold, constantly wet, and having to develop the personal skills and the personal admin skills to deal with that. I like Arctic travel. I like going to very, very cold places. I haven't done for a few years, but I used to do more of that. Because in a way, dry cold, that Arctic experience, that's easy. Make sure everything's zipped up. Make sure your layers are sorted out. Don't fall in the crevasse. Don't fall in the sea. Everything else after that is just boredom and stark beauty. But if you add moisture into that, if you add humidity into that, then it makes everything harder, because you'll just stand there, and no matter what you're wearing, you'll eventually develop hypothermia within a couple of hours, just because the damp gets into you. It gets underneath all of your layers, everything else. You're constantly sweating and then delayering and adding this and delayering and adding that. And there is I think to do anything in the outdoors here year round, you develop a very good outdoor skill set compared to when I speak to friends in, I don't know, Southern California or somewhere like that, where there are other things that might kill you.
Yeah.
You know, you might accidentally walk into a grow operation somewhere. But and there's wild animals and there's all these other things. But the climate itself isn't likely to kill you. Whereas here it's like there's a slow, insidious thing. There was a very famous internet thread a long time ago, which was somewhere out there in the world, there is a snail slowly making its way towards you. When it reaches you, it kills you. What are you going to do to stop that happening? And there's all these theories. It was like the helicopter on a turntable, plane on a treadmill type thing.
Yeah.
But I think about that, like the damp, and there's just that creeping, insidious dampness to the British Isles and to this kind of latitude, and to places like New Zealand and places like that. The time you spend in that environment, if you stop moving, if you haven't got a fire, if you haven't got the right kit, if you're not managing it in the right way, it's creeping towards you all the time. And it's gonna make everything soggy, everything damp. It means that everything has to be in dry bags, but you can't hang stuff up too dry. You can't just leave it on a line for an hour and it's dry again.
Yeah.
If your sleeping bag is made of down and it's starting to get water into those feathers into the pile, then you can't just leave it on your tent for an hour in the morning to get rid of your overnight sweat juice. You can, because, well, the air is damper than it was in the tent, or it's raining now, so there's that. It's the damp, really, and that's the thing that has conquered invaders in the British Isles for centuries.
Yeah, like no one, unless you're like a local to the Isles, you can't outlast or outperform that environment. And it was just interesting to see, my experience with like the UK forces, that these guys would come to wherever we were training and they could outperform anybody. And they would always joke and say, "Oh, it's shittier weather in Scotland, or it's weather in Wales." They're like, "It's way worse where we're from. This is not that bad."
Yeah, and there's that culture as well of not complaining.
Yeah.
Or you complain, but in a very non-specific way. You complain, but you still do the thing.
Yeah, exactly. And it is 100% a culture difference, because us as like Six and I as the North Americans, it's very different within our militaries. People to gripe, and people think it's harder than it is. And then you see the British guys and they're laughing because they're like, "Oh, there's sun today," even if it's like raining wherever you are.
Hey guys, this is 6 and 7 with the Hard Time Strongman podcast. Wanted to take a second to do a mental health check-in and to tell you all about the 988 Crisis Lifeline. So, the 988 Lifeline is a national network of local crisis centers that provides free and confidential emotional support to people in suicidal crisis or emotional distress 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the United States. You can reach the Lifeline at 988lifeline.org, or you can call or text 988 to get help, to get someone real on the phone.
Every struggle is different. Every struggle is hard. But you are not alone in whatever you're going through. As someone who has used the 988 crisis line, I fully recommend that if you're feeling any of those feelings of depression, suicide, hopelessness, get in touch with them immediately. They will help you. They will listen to you.
Once again, guys, you can reach the Lifeline at 988lifeline.org, or you can call or text them at 988. As always, guys, stay in the fight.
Stay in the fight.
I think that this is why tea is so important as well.
For you guys to brew up, and you're good.
Yeah. Because that's like the touchstone that's through everything. It's like, as long as you're no more than 5 minutes away from a cup of tea,
then it's
at
fine.
any one time.
Yeah,
then your outdoor skills are fine. Yeah, you're nailed.
Yeah.
So many things make so much sense now.
That's so funny. Yeah, as long as you can brew up, it's like you're fine.
It's a thing with, because I'm a civilian. I've worked with the military a few times, but it's been part of my life, but it's not a defining factor in my life. But I like, because we don't have full-time employees, but we have instructors that come along as freelancers for extended periods. Mm-hmm. I like employing from the military. Not because hoorah military, it's because because if you were successful in that environment to a point, and particularly from certain trades, but if you were successful in that environment, you had a certain way of thinking about things, a certain way of problem solving, and for an employer or anyone running a business, that is important, because a level of predictability in your people is important for me. And I think it's one of those skills. Having a really unpredictable set of guys, I've no idea what they're going to do next. Yeah. Well, that's not reassuring.
Business, yeah.
Whereas knowing, okay, well, this is probably the baseline of expectation of skill, problem solving, the way they process information, the way they will listen. I mean, they might think you're a complete ass when you're giving the briefings, the instructions, or whatever, but they'll probably be quiet and nod along and go along with you and let you get to the end of your completely stupid briefing. Mm-hmm. They might come to you afterwards. They might talk amongst themselves. They might have different ideas. They might ignore it completely and do the better thing anyway. But it was a level of comfort I found when working with people. And I think that had an influence on me as I was developing skills, because a lot of the guys I learned from were ex-military, which means that being late 30s, working in the outdoors, wearing a lot of tan clothing, beard, slightly vague about what I do for a living, I do have to explicitly say, I am a civilian. I've never been in the armed forces, never been in the armed forces. Because then I will say things like...
Yeah, because at first glance, they can't tell. Like, they're not really sure. Yeah.
And I'll say things like Bergen, chin-strapped. I'll start using terms that comes from the British military because they're in my head from when I was 21.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know, but how about for you guys? How much has that military experience and that mindset affected what you do? I suppose for the outdoors would be my initial point to ask questions. But how much do you reflect back on that, and how much do you think that has stayed with you, and how much comes from parallel learning to that and onward learning since the military?
Well, at least for me, vast majority of it is just the discipline. Like, you go out and you're outside. We had the saying, embrace the suck. So no matter how bad it is, just keep going. So that's pretty much just been my mentality approaching a lot of things in life. It's like, no matter how bad it is, suck it up, just keep going. They're like, it can always get worse, but it can always get better. There's always a chance, but no matter how bad it gets, just keep going. What about you, Nomad?
Yeah, it's different again. Like, it's not the Canadian Forces is very small. Like, again, Canada's like second largest landmass country in the world, and we're like a tenth of the size of Britain, like population wise. Like in total, like what I mean. And then our military's like, I don't know. I looked it up the other day, and it's like a quarter of the United States Marine Corps.
Oh my God!
So you're talking like even less people in Canada were in the military. And then even less people like did my job in the military, and even less people got out of my job and switched to law enforcement, and even less people left all that and still do outdoor stuff. So like I'm like a weird like 1% of people. But I don't know. I just I was very obsessed with this outdoor and space prior to the military, but again, it wasn't normalized in my upbringing. Like, I grew up in suburbia. I had never camped, Richard, until basic training. Like, that's super funny now, but I had never camped outside because my parents are like urbanites. I'd never camped until the Army. And then now, post-uniform, post-everything, for me, I just constantly reflect on the military was like a very, very loose baseline, but they never did anything well, if that makes sense. It's like they just did enough to not have people die. And then if you brought forth any outside experience to make that place better, you were just shit on, you were shunned. Or for me, I did a lot of hiking when I was in the military, but outside of work. I'd get a leave pass and I'd go to Jasper for the weekend. I'd go. And my supervisor would look at me and be like, why are you rucking for 3 days in the mountains? We do that for work. Right? It wasn't like normalized to want to like do it more on your own and like mastering the craft essentially, right? On like being as comfortable as you can be, practicing these skills. And I think the military is a downfall for a lot of people in this space because like 6, 7 and I talk about this all the time. When you're doing outdoor stuff, not in the military, you don't have an entire rear echelon to support you. It's all on your own now. And a lot of people in the military can fake it because they're one dude in a platoon or they're one dude in a company, or if they're mechanized, their vehicle's there or whatever the case may be. But to actually do normalized outdoor things, and again, like just being, a family man now with like kids and like, a woman, I'm in charge of all of it now. Whereas in the military, I was a team leader and I was section commander. I was in charge of, 10 dudes, but I was just one cog in the machine in the platoon. I was just another guy. There was other people helping me. So yeah, it's just very different translating it back and forth, but it's always something that's going to be with me. Like I spent from 17 to 29 in uniform. So it's all I knew as like a young man. And again, I never camped outside before I wore green, but it's just, they just do a lot of things very poorly to a mediocre standard here in Canada. And like, again, it's not even a pessimistic thing, Richard, because like I said, I've spoken to a lot of other forces and they'd look at us and be like, you guys are whack. Like you don't know anything. And the British guys love to use the term, we're going to bleep me out, but the British always called us at everything. At everything they saw. Yeah. And I even had a Royal Marine Commando dude in Afghanistan look at me and say, I don't know how my country let you guys police yourselves. Yeah, because he was convinced that we should have been left under like the Commonwealth and we should have never been allowed to do anything on our own. And I'm like, well, you're not wrong. Like I totally believe that. And again, from the outdoor perspective, if most people in Canada aren't getting after it in the bush like you assumed, I'm like, well, he's not wrong because people in your position in Wales would love to use my backyard as a training area, right? It's just not appreciated here.
There's a lot of things that we actually did. So I grew up on a farm in rural Indiana, actually. And a lot of us would just grab our tents and go out back, way out into the field and just camp. But we still had that essentially rear echelon of, hey, we need to go piss or something. Well, let's just go back up to the house. We need food. Go back up to the house, to the refrigerator. I mean, none of us really practiced any of that stuff. Even when I got into the military, I noticed that I could count on one hand how many guys went out and actually did camping on top of all the other training that we did in the field. We never learned any fieldcraft stuff. We never learned how to start fires. We never learned how to survive. Like, that was not on any of our radars. And even in our off time, nobody did it because we spent so much time out in the field just being miserable that nobody wanted to do that stuff. So what did I do? I didn't do it. I just went to the range, shot.
Yeah, and then I was doing that stuff, and people thought I was weird, right? Like on the weekend, I would do that, Richard, and people are like, what's wrong with this dude? Like, we're in the field like 200 days a year. Why is this guy going on his own with his rucksack?
Let's start counting the reasons.
You assume you're hiding bodies out there.
Yeah, it's just like very different, but like all the British guys that I have met, like in uniform or out, or even now in this, either through the podcast or like my social media account, it's like it's normalized for them. Like what you said, the British guys will find a way to find land and get outside and do whatever it is they have to do. And when you're cold, wet, and miserable for 300 days of the year, these guys are still happy to be out there. Versus the North American side, it's not normalized, or like Six and I said, it's people are so dependent on the gear, or the military side, they're so dependent on, well, I'll get in that vehicle when I'm cold. And again, like I know 6 and 7, they were in like a mechanized infantry unit, so they weren't like, they didn't walk everywhere, they were driven. But I was in a light infantry unit, and I lived out of a rucksack for like weeks at a time with, I had food and water that showed up, but just like Six said, I never was formally shown until later in my military career. But most infantry guys here aren't shown how to make a fire. They're not shown how to make a shelter. It's just not a thing we're taught.
We didn't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I've done training for different units in the UK Armed Forces, but we were doing something for an infantry unit, without getting more into that. And then we were talking about firelighting and different things, and I thought, okay, I'm going to have to bring some really high-speed stuff here to show you this, this, and this. And it's like, okay, we're doing cotton wool and Vaseline then, apparently, because let's start with the stuff that works and reliable. And although there was one moment where I was...
He's got it right there.
There's one moment where I was... this is the early days of vape pens.
Oh yeah,
as well, and they were quite the long, elaborate ones.
The big ones,
with the big lithium batteries that just go on fire if you look at them wrong. And I was getting the guy, like, just brought one guy. I was like, okay, turn out your pockets, turn out your webbing. What have you got? And I'm going through everything in there that could be used to light a fire, beyond ammunition and stuff like that. But just that and that and that. Yeah, that first field dressing. Yeah, that if you can get a spark to that will burn, but only if you do this to it. And we got to his vape pen, and it was, okay, well, that oil is flammable. There's a battery in there. You can short circuit. You can get a spark from that. You can get that to burn. And he was saying, no, you can't. And it's like, no, honestly, you can. I can find a video on, people doing this, but you can do this. No, you can't. Why? Well, this is a survival situation. Yeah. If you want the rest of these, you have to bleep this. Fuckers to survive this situation. I need that vape pen.
Yeah, like this guy was gonna die before he gave it to you.
God. Yeah. Oh, I think it was. Yeah, he was suspicious when I started handling it, because I think he was like sliding his right foot back, just to go to the ground to take this back. But so with that thing with the perception of military skills and then maybe the reality of military skills,
I think it's unit dependent though, like for sure. And like, it depends on your job and depends on your unit, and like depends on where that baseline is, or honestly it depends on who your leadership is too, because I've had guys whenever I was like a private, they were like section commanders or section 2 ICs, and these guys were super into fieldcraft, and they're like, "Hey, I'm going to show you how to make a fire. Not because we're going to have a camping trip, but if we're on an exercise and the weather gets bad and we die, I'm going to save some of you." Yeah.
The one of the scenarios we used to use for the training we delivered, it was called environmental survival training, and it was one of the scenarios was helicopter has crashed during an exercise in Canada. You are these guys. This is the equipment you have. You have 48 hours to survive and it's winter and there's a storm coming. It was those kind of things.
Yeah.
It was no one can get to you for this time. Nobody knew where you were. It's going to take a while for SAR to find you.
Did they just have their Bergen or just their webbing or like their belt kit? What did they have?
I think we made it hard for them. I think we made it was like, for some reason your Bergens were left out. And
it fell out of the chopper as it went down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a worst scenario, but it was based around that, not the, okay, you're on the run from the Stasi. Yeah. And these guys are chasing you, and these guys are, lie in a ditch or not. There's only so many options you have for that kind of seer. What I was going to ask was that with this perception of, the military.
Being the baseline.
Military veteran.
Yeah.
What are your opinions then when people say, I'm an outdoor survival expert, I'm a military outdoor survival expert, I'm a veteran developing this company, and that they're leaning a lot on
their resume experience. They're leaning a lot on their past laurels.
Just it depends.
I've
on
got an answer.
Like it depends on
what. I'm skeptical at first, because you could have been the SEER instructor, and again, I'll use the U.S. forces, like, because again, I'm not in the U.S. forces or never was, but I do know the Air Force and the U.S. military has like that SEER instructor.
Yes.
Like pipeline. So that's all they do. That's all these guys do is teach survive, escape, resist, evade to pilots, to special forces units, to whatever. So if someone like that said that, I'm like, well, he's probably correct. He probably knows more than most people coming at this. But if you were a truck driver in the British Army, let's say, for 3 years or 4 years, but your buddies are like, he was in the Army. I'm like, he's not a subject matter expert in anything. He wore, multi-terrain pattern or DPM or whatever, but he's not anything close to being proficient, let alone a master of it. So I think it's you got to take it with a grain of salt, but it's I question right away. Not that I'm like doubtful. I just want to know more than that generic answer.
So there was a period in the early 2000s where survival TV shows were starting to become really popular, and they were cropping up everywhere.
Yeah.
Alongside the Bear Grylls stuff.
Bear Grylls, Les Stroud.
Baked.
What was that?
Yeah.
Man versus
Man versus
What was
Wild.
that other guy? No, Man versus
Yeah.
Wild was Bear Grylls. But what's the guy where he's on a horse and he's tracking people? Do you guys remember that one?
I don't know that one.
First Man Out, is that? Or...
I'm trying to remember his. He had a bunch in Canada, but through the United States, and he was Man Tracker, I think. He was on a horse and he tracked two people, and you could just like try and get away from this dude. Yeah.
There were a load of these things because everyone was jumping on the genre.
Mm-hmm.
They went through. There was a period there where a lot of TV consultants they're coming out of the military, and they were using. Okay, yes, he's a TV survival outdoor consultant. He's from the military.
Yeah.
And that, speaking to people who were working around at that time, that fell over quite quickly because they realised that what that person was quite good at was replicating what they had done for 10 to 15 years in the British Army or the US Army or whatever it was, which isn't necessarily applicable to this situation in front of them.
Yeah.
Because it's relying on that long supply chain of equipment and personnel and other support services that are coming to get you, coming to bring you stuff, whatever. Or you're trained around a certain set of equipment. And then they started shifting towards civilian instructors more and civilian consultants. So I've got friends who now work full-time or almost full-time doing this as behind the scenes on TV for shows like Alone, maybe Alone, depending on what he's working on that year. But they're from civilian backgrounds, they're from expedition backgrounds, these were the guys who just spent 5 years backpacking around the world, living out of a rucksack and improvising, because they had more of that experience than somebody who had been wearing multicam for a decade.
100%, but I think it's with the social media aspect, it's just very glorified, and we put these people on a pedestal and then don't realize that not all skills from the military are applicable to this space, and people just don't want to hear it, or people think it's to the highest standard. And 6-7 and I have talked about this so many times that it's just it's done to a very low standard, again, to just not die. Like that's it. It doesn't mean you're a subject matter expert, but again, if you are that SEER instructor and this is all you did for 15 years and that was your job, like teaching survival skills to pilots, I'm like, okay, he probably knows a thing or two. But it's just interesting because I'm glad you brought up Alone as well, because most of that show, or a lot of the seasons are literally filmed in my area in Canada. Like they're filmed right near me, and every time that show has a veteran on it, I joke and say like, oh, they're gonna quit. I'm like, it's always someone who's just a normal dude who was never in the military that crushes it. And these military guys are usually the first to, or not the first, but they quit very early on to the series. And I think people get surprised. I'm like, well, no, that dude probably was a cook. Like, we don't know. He just says he's in the Army. Like, I don't know what he did.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean
maybe
anything.
Or somebody who's in the military who did that stuff a lot looked at that and went, no, that's stupid. I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or
I'm gonna go and work a job and have a family and a house and be comfortable.
Honestly, that's been my experience too. Is like I got out and immediately some of my friends were like, "Hey, you want to go run a half marathon with me?" I'm like, "No, why would I want to do that? I did 5Ks every Monday morning for like years. Why would I want to go run a freaking marathon? Or let's go backpacking out here." I'm just like, dude, my knees are shot. I don't want to go do this right now. Like, no.
Yeah.
I'm the weirdo. I did that on my days off, and I still want to do all that stuff.
Respect, yeah.
But it's just
your knees will give up one day.
yeah. Because
Tomorrow.
I'm not far behind you in age, Richard, and a lot of people ask, especially like how much jumping I've done. They're like, man, you're pretty lucky to still be like quasi fit and like you're not totally destroyed yet. But
oh yeah, I'm grateful for my continued fitness. I'm not the smallest of guys. I'm like 6'2", and what is it in American? About
use pounds.
270 pounds, 275
You do the
pounds.
conversion, no worry.
So it's I'm a heavy boy. But
at 6'2", you could smash people though.
I played rugby. Even when I had a six pack, I was like 250.
Oh yeah, that's
I'm 6'1".
Dude, you're 100% Spartan. Yeah, like that's strong. That's big.
But I'm conscious of knees and things like that, and I do make sure I train for my size, as it were. I don't take that for granted, so that I can still carry a pack and still carry heavy stuff and go over. I mean, I spent all day today carrying a shotgun around a rocky farm, going up and down, uphill and down dale. And I try and make sure I maintain that fitness and maintain those things, because I know so many people my age or slightly older who they're on their second knee surgery, they've had back surgery, they've had this and that, and it's like, this is why I stopped playing rugby, because I was getting out of the car for training at the weekend and seeing guys in their early 30s getting out or getting back into the car with the ice pack on their knee, putting the brace on, and thinking, oh, there's not a longevity in this. There's not a lot in this contact sport thing. But yeah, that fitness thing as you get older, it's something that really plays on my mind, and it's part of that overall planning of what are you going to do with your life, what's your mission, what are you driving towards. Part of that is to be able to do stuff for as long as possible. And I think going back to that, like the military thing, I think the military has been a very good place for people to get broken for a long time because of the equipment, the training, the operations, the stuff you have to do.
Yeah, or like if it's not physical, it's mental, right? Just like what Six said, you don't want to be outside anymore, or you have PTSD and you can't even go outside anymore, or whatever the case may be. So trying to find that balance is I definitely think like the healthy route, but it's, again, we're just trying to like normalize this culture so that if you were in uniform, if you're not in uniform, we're just trying to bring the bigger picture and the aspect that you can still enjoy these things and be prepared and maybe not even go outside all the time to train and like make a shelter, right? Just go outside and go for a walk, you know what I mean? Or like do something recreational that's not I'm going to train today. Like, well, you could do other things. And like you said, the longevity of it, you're going to be doing this when you're 55 if you approach it long term.
But the ability to walk over rough ground at night with a head torch, that's something you have to learn.
Yes.
Honestly.
That's something you have to learn, and that's something you have to develop. And that's not the sort of thing people think of in terms of preparedness, but it's like, okay, you have to leave your house now and walk 10 miles to the west, whatever, or to the east if you live on the west coast. But that is the simple thing that you have to do to get out of this dangerous situation, wildfire, whatever it is. Can you do that with your family in the middle of the night? Do you have the skills to do that? Because you can practice that every weekend on a hike.
Yep.
As a really soft skill. No matter what preparedness kit, chest rig, side up, what, all these other things that seem to be everywhere for the North American social media stuff. That's just gear. That stuff. Those are just accessories. The real stuff is, am I fit enough to do this? Can I do this? Can I pull this out of the toolkit right now and use it as a skill? And you can practice those things, like you're saying, going out with your family, going in as a really soft skill all of the time. And I think about this, like just when I'm walking the dogs, I choose routes that we're going for. Take the dog on a 2-mile walk in the evening. I choose a nice, simple, easy route. That for some days, yeah, we're going to go straight up that hill through the undergrowth, through everything else.
Yeah.
Because I will hate it, but I'll be glad I did it. And when I have to do that when I'm hunting, and I'm retrieving an animal, or just where we were shooting pheasants today, and hiking uphill with shotguns, and having to do firearm safety, having to move safely, make sure you're moving in the line with the guy to the left and the right of me, so we were all staying in line together. And reading the terrain ahead of me, looking for the birds, looking for all these things, thinking, I'm doing about 30 different things in parallel here. None of them is super extreme, mega outdoor skill that would feature in a TV show. But they're all skills that I have developed over quite a long period of time. And I think that's the thing that people miss. And like you said, it's you don't have to go really hardcore straight into the sub-zero Arctic shelter, leaf litter, living out of a Ziploc bag and one nitrile glove. You don't. That's one end of the spectrum. Sort out being able to walk uphill with a rucksack first.
Yeah.
If you can do that, then work on that, and then build from there.
I like you brought up the natural disaster thing, because let's be real, that's the most common emergency that happens to most people, regardless of where they live. Natural disasters. And in British Columbia, Canada, every year there's this massive thing that comes from California. These forest fires happens every year, and the province hasn't figured it out yet. And you'll be driving or evacuated from your region, and I'm driving on the highway, and I'm passing by thousands of cars, and people are walking around with like luggage, like airport luggage and shit with their kids because they don't like have anything, or okay, the road's blocked. Where do you go?
And he's going for repeated tests of whether conifers are flammable.
Yeah, right. Every year, these people haven't figured it out that this is a thing, and maybe if I live in the region where there's a forest fire, I should, know that I have a rucksack and, water, or like whatever the case may be. It's just like you said, it's
flames of hell come from California.
Yeah, it all comes from California and all the way up the coast, and then British Columbia's on fire for the whole summer, and there's like a federal fire ban. They're like, you can't have a fire. Like, oh, okay, cool. But
thanks, California.
Yeah, but like, there's a lot of people though that I honestly don't think that if we woke them up today and said, here's a 35-pound rucksack and everything in there is like what you need for 2 days to not die. Just literally, you're gonna walk for 12 hours, and then when you stop, you're gonna set up a camp. It's not gonna be tactical. It's gonna be you're just gonna make a shelter and not die. That's it. So I don't think a lot of people can do that, and I think they don't want to do that because it's the realization that they can't. Whereas it's easy to just buy a piece of gear. It's easy to, it's easy for me to hit that like button on Instagram and be like, oh, I'm really liking that post I'm really liking that post that like Richard Prideaux did, but I'm not going to go outside. Like, that's too hard. So I'll just like it from afar.
Well, I can share a very short story for this, that we had somebody that came to us as a client as a result of our survival podcast.
Okay.
Because they got freaked out by Ukraine at the very beginning of last year.
Yep.
And they started, Putin's going to nuke us and that kind of thing. So they went out and bought...
Total fear-based purchase, but that's okay for you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They bought a pair of bug-out bags.
Oh, a
from
pair.
Amazon.
Oh, so
and
like pre-staged ones or preloaded or whatever, or just
preloaded, and they added a load of other stuff to it based on some stuff they read on the internet. I mean, I'm not crapping on these people because they're very good people, and their intention was well. Intention was well, and that and I covered this in one of our episodes. But they came to us and said, I think we may have overdone this a little bit. Can you give us some sort of training experience that maybe shows us how far we've got it wrong? It's like, oh yes, I can do that. So we gave them a sort of a 24-hour bug out type experience. All the instructions I gave them were, get to this one small farming town in the middle of nowhere in Wales, and be at this clock tower in the middle of the town at midday with your bags. That was it. That was the only instruction I gave them. Mm-hmm. What we set up was a whole zigzag of land nav routes back and forth across this valley that started with somebody just walking past them at 1 second past midday and just dropped an envelope onto their lap and walked off. Which was then the instructions.
Like their instructions,
you have to get to this place within this time limit. Mm-hmm. And then you got there, and then there was like another cache, and they got to get... And they zigzagged, so they did about 10 miles back and forth across the valley in the middle of summer. It was heat, up and down, through mud.
That's
and we
awesome.
were watching them from vehicles, with a drone, with optics, watching them suffer, and then taking photos of them that we were sending to them by a text message throughout the whole thing. Then they got into the woods, and then it was, okay, you are in this woodland, you can't talk to anyone, you can't know communication with the outside world, sort out your needs of life from your bags. And we just broke their system, literally broke everything in there. And then we sat down at the end of it and went, right, I, for this, have done the same thing you did with more planning, and I just lived out of a 40-litre rucksack with camping gear in it. Mm-hmm. And I was more comfortable than you.
Than you. Just, like, crush these people's, like, initial plan.
Yeah. So
their soul.
And it was this...
How big was the bag that these people had? Do you remember? Was it huge?
It was
like 100 liters?
No, it wasn't. It was big, but it was stupid shape. It was like the 511 Rush 72 Mollet bag that just sticks out for a mile from your back.
From your back, yeah.
Yeah. And so you're really off balance and they're uncomfortable and they pull on your chest. It was like one of those kind of size bags with stuff strapped to it. They look like two hobbits.
Oh, that's
they look like
awesome.
They have to throw a ring at a volcano.
That's awesome.
but they went through a great learning experience, and then they've done other stuff since, and they actually update me with, yeah, we've done this, we've sold this, we got rid of all that stuff, we bought these things instead on your recommendation. So they're really good people. But we had a similar experience to what you were talking about, that, okay, you don't know what's coming, you don't know how long this thing's going to last for.
Just go.
You don't know what you have to deal with. All of your careful plans aren't going to matter. What you need to be is resilient and flexible.
Mm-hmm.
And willing to just keep going.
Yeah, and it's just it's not, I don't think, normalized again within this culture, right? They want to consume a piece of gear to solve the problem, but until you've done that trial and testing, like what you did with those clients, which is awesome, putting them through the ringer for a day, then they're going to kind of get a wake up call.
Mm-hmm. And you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know until you try it. So go out and fail.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just make sure it's a repeatable failure, not like how bad is the rest of the day going to be? Is it the end of the day at this failure? Is it the end of your life? Try and avoid those and just go for the small failure.
Yeah. I guess, yeah, we could talk about that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So in regards to kind of moving forward with this outdoor community, and I don't even want to just call it preparedness. Yeah, just anything outdoors. Is there anything that you think, Richard, that like people should be kind of pushing towards in regards to training, or like methodology, or just an overall improvement in this like space and culture?
I'd say being skeptical about where the information is coming from is a big one. Just because it's in a meme format doesn't mean it's true, or just because somebody has found a military training manual from the 70s, and, oh, look at this stuff that we forgot about, these guys used to do. It's like, well, maybe there's a reason we stopped doing that, because maybe that was just the military equivalent of an old wives' tale. Mm-hmm. Or medical stuff has moved on beyond that. So be skeptical about that information, because it's not necessarily coming from a point of malice or trying to be intentionally deceptive. It's just somebody doesn't know better. They're no further ahead in the book than you are, but they're just looking at a slightly different side of the page. But they don't have a hidden skill set that you've missed. It's just actually they don't know that what they're sharing isn't right either. So look at that. And then there is the intentionally deceptive. People are sharing information because it's sponsored, or because it's in order to get more reviews, or because it's there to get more views on their channel. What they're doing is sharing what the algorithm wants, not what is good outdoors training, or training for whatever subject it is. And then normalize mistakes, normalize failure. And this doesn't mean like striving for failure in everything you do, but it means failing upwards, don't try and repeat the same mistake. Find a different mistake that's further along the track. Find a different mistake that's further up in that skill set, because there's always another thing you don't know. Even if those things are getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and it comes down to 1 millimeter that way, 1 millimeter that way, you could always be better at what you're doing. So learn from those mistakes, and make it okay in your environment for those mistakes to be talked about. Because I said at the beginning of the podcast that as an instructor, all I have to sell is a sum total of my mistakes and what I've learned from them. There's a parallel to that, which is some of what I have to sell is learning from the mistakes of others and them talking to me about their mistakes. If somebody says, oh yeah, I nearly died doing this, it's like, how did you nearly die? What would you have done differently? How did you screw this up? Mm-hmm. So I don't have to go through that failure. I can learn from your error. And this is what I get from working with clients, because they find new ways to screw things up that I would never have thought of. And I find like, you've used that piece of equipment in a way that's so wrong, I wouldn't have even thought about it. Well done. You're going to become a story in the next class.
Yeah.
But it's okay to make those mistakes as long as you approach the aftermath of them in the right way, and not just turn to somebody and go, oh, you're an idiot because you made a mistake. It's like, well, are you perfect? Have you never made a mistake? I'm really interested in sharing my mistakes with people, but more importantly, what I've learned. And what else? Just calm down a bit. Not everything is meant to be super mega exciting, thrashing around, this exciting, all this adrenaline all the other time. It's like, yeah, you don't want to be in a permanent fight or flight state. No. Quiet, boring competence is what gets you through stuff and saves lives and makes you safer and makes you a better person. Being the unpredictable person that's always jigging around and never quite and always doing the thing. It's, I've just done this thing. You'll never guess what I've just done. It's like, I wish I could, because what you're about to tell me isn't going to be good for me or the tribe.
Yeah,
those people didn't survive in a hunter-gatherer society. The people that survived were allowed to survive. That, Terry didn't come back from the hunting trip. Those people who were allowed to survive and were there for the good of the tribe were the people that could be relied upon.
Yeah, exactly.
I said I was going to meet him at this rock under the next full moon. When the next full moon came over the horizon, he's not here. Something has happened to him, which means, because he's always reliable. Instead, I was going to meet him at this rock. Well, he could have forgotten. He could be doing something else. He could be chasing the girl from the next village. It could be any number of things. You can't build a society on unpredictability. So being predictable, being competent and calm should be what we're striving for, not being the most exciting person in the room.
Yeah, 100%. And like in a day and age now where everything is about likes and shares and followers, I think we've gone so far away from that, where people just kind of go back to their baseline on their values and their beliefs and be like, hey, I just need to do this because it's best for me and my family. Yeah, you won't really stir off of that. No,
that's me.
Yeah,
I've got no other wisdom. Nothing else of value.
Nothing else of value. Would you be able to just plug in your because you have two Instagrams? I know there's Richard Prideaux, and then there's Original Outdoors has one as well. But so does your podcast, does it not?
Oh, I've got even more than that. It's even worse than you think.
Drop them. Drop them all.
Drop them, and then we will put them all in the description as well.
I'm at Rich Prideaux, but that's quite vanilla. That's just me and some of my photography and some of the random stuff I get to do at work. Mm-hmm. You might see my German Shepherd on there occasionally.
We're all fans of shepherds on this podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, I've got a shepherd
in the background. Yeah. There's at Original Outdoor, which is the sort of public side of the business, and which is gradually becoming more content creation than anything else.
Okay.
We have a website which is outdoorprofessional.co.uk, which is, if you were coming to see what we do with professional end users and that kind of training, you can go and have a look at that, but that's very boring and corporate. Podcast wise, Modern Outdoor Survival is probably the one that's most appropriate to this conversation. That's on all of your podcatchers, Spotify, Apple, wherever. We try to make sure it's in as many places as possible. And there's an Instagram account for that, at Modern Outdoor Survival. But yeah, it's not difficult to track me down if you just search my name. There's only about 3 of us with that name in the world, I think.
That's awesome.
What's this new podcast that you were talking about that's coming out?
It's called, thank you for asking, it's called Modern Bushcraft.
Modern Bushcraft.
Modern Bushcraft. Okay.
Yeah, because I want to.
We will plug that as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, guys. Yeah, this is the good side of social media, because you get to have conversations with real people, even if it is via DMs. Because you can see a bit more about what they're like if they're regularly posting.
Yeah.
Modern Bushcraft, it should be out mid-February, and it is talking about some of the skills we've talked about in this episode, but also some of that mindset of where you're not just a passenger in the landscape, you are part of it, you are living part of it, and you understand the things that you're seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, and you can make use of them, or at least know how to avoid them making use of you.
That's awesome. I'm going to subscribe as soon as that is available.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome, Richard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
you, guys.
Yeah, we really appreciate you coming on the show, Richard, and taking the time, especially with the time zone difference between 3 time zones and an ocean. We made it work.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for having me on, guys, and it was a pleasure being here, and it's always slightly weird being on someone else's podcast.
Hope it was a good experience, though.
Yeah, and hopefully we can do more stuff again in the future. So
absolutely.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. This has been Hard Times Strongman Podcast, creating a better class of man. Stay savage and stay in the fight.